In 1943, an American housewife needed a booklet of stamps just to buy a pound of butter. Sugar, coffee, meat, cheese, all of it controlled by little colored points torn from a ration book. Most people picture the home front as patriotic posters and victory gardens. The truth on the dinner plate was stranger. Number 17 on this list was made almost entirely of crackers and tasted like apple pie, with no apples in it. Number 4 required a plastic packet and a strong wrist just to turn it yellow. And number 1 fed more American families through the war than any ration stamp ever could. Hit that subscribe button and let us count down the 25 shocking meals families actually ate during World War II rationing. Number 25, mock apple pie. This is the meal that told your neighbors you had run completely out of apples and refused to admit defeat. During the war, apples were not rationed, but in many towns they were expensive, scarce, or simply gone by late winter. So your grandmother reached for a box of crackers. She broke about 20 of them into rough pieces, laid them in a pie shell, and poured over a syrup made from water, sugar, cream of tartar, cinnamon, and a squeeze of lemon. Into the oven it went. The crackers softened, absorbed the spiced syrup, and swelled into something that sliced and tasted almost exactly like apple filling. The cream of tartar gave it the tartness. The cinnamon fooled the nose. Children ate it and never questioned it. The recipe was even printed right on the cracker box for years because the company knew exactly how desperate American kitchens had become. A whole pie cost pennies and used not a single piece of fruit. Number 24, creamed chipped beef on toast. Soldiers had a much saltier name for it, but at home mothers just called it a hot supper. A small jar of dried pressed beef cost very little and was not rationed the way fresh steak was. Your grandmother tore those thin, salty slices into strips, dropped them into a white sauce made from a little flour, milk, and a scrape of butter or dripping, and let it thicken until it clung to a spoon. Then she poured the whole steaming mess over toasted bread. The saltiness of the beef seasoned the entire sauce, so she barely needed anything else. The toast soaked up the gravy and turned soft and rich underneath. Men who came home from the service recognized it instantly and asked for it on purpose. For a family stretching a paycheck across a month of rationing, this was a full plate of protein and starch for the price of a jar of beef and a splash of milk. Number 23, fried Spam. No single food defines the American war table quite like the little blue can. Spam was canned. It lasted for months without refrigeration, and best of all, it took fewer ration points than fresh meat. So it landed in kitchens by the millions. Your grandmother sliced it thick, scored the edges so it would not curl, and laid it in a hot skillet until each side blistered brown and crisp. The fat rendered out, and the outside caramelized into something salty and almost sweet. She served it with fried eggs for breakfast, tucked it between 2 slices of bread with mustard for lunch, or diced it into whatever was simmering on the stove for supper. Some families ate it 3 ways in a single day. People joke about Spam now, but during rationing, it was a genuine gift. It was meat that kept, meat that stretched, and meat that asked almost nothing from the ration book your whole family depended on. Number 22, salmon patties. When the butcher counter was thin and the red meat points were already spent, canned salmon was the fish that carried American kitchens. A tall can of pink salmon was cheap, and it sat on the pantry shelf for a year without complaint. Your grandmother drained it, picked out the biggest bones, and mixed the rest with cracker crumbs, an egg, a little grated onion, and a spoonful of mustard. She shaped the mixture into flat patties and fried them until the outside crisped into a golden shell, and the inside stayed moist and pink. The soft little bones in the can carried calcium that most families never knew they were getting. Served with a spoonful of creamed peas or a wedge of cornbread, Salmon patties felt like something you would order at a diner, not something you scrape together from a can. Children who swore they hated fish ate them without a second thought. Number 21. Vinegar pie. Here is where wartime baking gets clever. Lemons were a luxury on most tables, and fresh fruit for pie was often out of reach. But a pie shell demanded filling, so your grandmother reached for the vinegar bottle. She whisked together vinegar, sugar, a couple of eggs, a little flour, and a pinch of nutmeg, then baked it slow. What came out of the oven was tangy, smooth, and shockingly close to lemon custard. The sharp bite of the vinegar mimicked citrus well enough to fool a tired family at the end of a long day. It was the kind of dessert that existed for one reason: to put something sweet on the table when the pantry said it could not be done. Poor cooks across the South and Midwest had baked vinegar pie for generations before the war. But rationing brought it roaring back into ordinary kitchens that had forgotten it. Number 20. Wacky cake. They also called it war cake, crazy cake, or depression cake, and it broke every rule of baking. No eggs, no butter, no milk. During the war, all three were rationed or scarce, and yet birthdays still came around, and children still deserved chocolate. So your grandmother mixed flour, sugar, cocoa, salt, and baking soda right in the pan, made 3 little wells, and poured in oil, vinegar, and vanilla. Then she added water and stirred. The vinegar reacted with the baking soda to give the cake its lift, doing the job that eggs normally did. It baked up dark, moist, and tender, and it stayed soft for days. Nobody at the table could taste vinegar or guess what was missing. This was the cake that let a mother keep her promises when the ration book said no. And it still shows up at potlucks today, though almost nobody remembers it was born out of an empty wartime pantry. Number 19. Water pie. If vinegar pie was resourceful, water pie was pure defiance. This was dessert built from almost nothing at all. Your grandmother poured plain water into a pie shell. And yes, that is the real first ingredient. Then she scattered flour and sugar over the top, added dabs of whatever fat she could spare, a splash of vanilla, and slid it into the oven. As it baked, the flour and sugar thickened the water into a translucent, custardy filling that set into gel around the edges and stayed just barely soft in the middle. It tasted faintly of vanilla and butterscotch, sweet and strange and comforting. It cost practically nothing and used no eggs, no milk, and no fruit. Families ate it on the nights when there was truly nothing left to bake with, and it turned an empty cupboard into a warm slice of pie on the table. There is no better symbol of the wartime kitchen than a pie made mostly of water. Number 18. Meatloaf stretched with oatmeal. Ground beef took red ration points, and points ran out fast, so the whole game was making a little meat feed a lot of people. Your grandmother knew the secret. She mixed 1 pound of ground beef with a full cup of rolled oats, a beaten egg, a grated onion, and a splash of milk before pressing it into a loaf pan. The oats swelled as they absorbed the meat juices and soaked up the fat that would otherwise drip away. So nothing was lost, and the loaf held together in perfect slices. That single pound of beef suddenly fed 6 people, and every serving tasted rich and savory. Some cooks used stale bread or cracker crumbs instead of oats, but oatmeal was cheap and always in the cupboard. The trick was so effective that it never left American kitchens. The difference is that your grandmother did it because she had to, stretching Sunday's meat ration across a Tuesday supper too. Number 17. Liver and onions. Here is a secret the ration book handed to smart cooks. Organ meats, liver, heart, kidney, and the rest cost almost no ration points at all. The government wanted families to eat them so the good cuts could go to the troops. Butchers had more liver than they knew what to do with, and it was one of the most nutritious foods in the country, packed with iron and vitamins. Your grandmother sliced beef liver thin, dredged it in flour, and laid it in a hot skillet while onions caramelized soft and sweet in a second pan. The trick was speed. 2 minutes aside and no more, because overcooked liver turned tough and bitter, which is exactly how a whole generation of children learned to dread it. Done right, it was mild, rich, and tender, the outside golden, the inside still faintly pink, buried under a mountain of sweet onions. A nourishing, point-cheap supper that kept families strong. Number 16. City chicken. This dish is one of the great pieces of wartime theater because there was never any chicken in it. In the industrial towns of the Midwest and the Rust Belt, poultry was actually pricier and scarcer than pork, so families faked it. Your grandmother cut cheap cubes of pork and sometimes a little veal, threaded them onto short wooden skewers to look like a drumstick, rolled them in seasoned flour and egg and breadcrumbs, then browned them in a skillet and finished them low and slow in the oven until tender. The skewer gave you something to hold, just like a real chicken leg. It looked like a plate of little fried drumsticks, and to children it felt like a treat. The whole illusion turned humble scraps of pork into a supper that seemed special. City chicken outlived the war by decades in those towns, passed from mother to daughter, most of them long past remembering why on earth it was named after a bird. Number 15. Prune whip. Sugar was one of the very first foods rationed back in the spring of 1942, and dessert had to get creative fast. Dried prunes were cheap, they were not rationed, and they carried their own deep, natural sweetness. So your grandmother simmered a handful of prunes until they turned soft, mashed them into a dark, thick paste, then folded that paste into egg whites, beaten stiff with just a whisper of sugar. The result was a light, airy, mousse-like cloud that tasted far sweeter than the little bit of sugar in it should have allowed. She spooned it into glasses, sometimes chilled it, and served it as a proper dessert at the end of the meal. It felt fancy, it felt like abundance, and it stretched a bag of dried fruit into something a child would actually get excited about. Prune whip showed up in newspaper columns and church cookbooks all through the war years. The elegant answer to a sugar shortage. First pattern break. Here is where the wartime kitchen gets truly interesting. None of these meals make sense until you understand the ration book. Every man, woman, and child in America was issued one, a little booklet of stamps, and without the right stamps, your money was useless. Red points bought meat, butter, and fats. Blue points bought canned and processed foods. Sugar had its own stamp. Coffee had its own stamp. The point values changed constantly, so a cut of meat that cost 8 points 1 week might cost 12 the next. And a good cook had to do math at the butcher counter with a toddler on her hip and a line of neighbors behind her. Running out of points before the end of the month was a real and constant fear. Everything on this list, the mock pies, the stretched loaves, the point-cheap organ meats, was an answer to those little colored stamps. This was not nostalgia cooking. This was arithmetic, and the family that did the math wrong went hungry. Number 14. Cottage cheese loaf. With meat points scarce, the government and the magazines pushed a strange idea hard, that you could bake a loaf that stood in for meat entirely. Your grandmother mixed cottage cheese with breadcrumbs or cooked rice, a beaten egg, chopped onion, and whatever seasoning she had, then pressed it into a loaf pan and baked it until it firmed up and browned on top. Sliced and served with a spoonful of tomato sauce or brown gravy, it looked like a meatloaf and filled the same hole on the plate. The cottage cheese carried real protein, so it was not just empty filler. It was one of dozens of so-called meat extenders and meat substitutes that wartime home economists invented to keep families fed and the good cuts flowing overseas. Some families genuinely liked it, Others tolerated it because the alternative was no main dish at all. Either way, it fed people, and it stretched a week that meat alone could not cover. Number 13. Carrot cookies. Sugar rationing sent bakers hunting for sweetness anywhere they could find it, and carrots became an unlikely hero. Carrots grew easily in the Victory Garden. They were never rationed, and cooked down, they turned soft and genuinely sweet. So your grandmother boiled and mashed them, then stirred that orange mash into a cookie dough to replace much of the sugar. The result was a soft, cake-like cookie with a warm sweetness and a lovely color, often spiced with a little cinnamon. Carrots showed up in everything during the war, in cakes, in puddings, even boiled down into a sticky candy for children. The government printed pamphlets pushing the humble carrot precisely because families could grow mountains of them for free. A batch of carrot cookies used almost no rationed sugar, cost next to nothing, and let a mother send her children off with a sweet in their pocket during years when a real candy bar was a rare and precious thing. Number 12. Dandelion greens with hot bacon dressing. When the garden and the wallet both ran thin, families looked to the ground under their feet. Dandelions grew wild in every yard, every ditch, every vacant lot, and they were free. Your grandmother sent the children out to pick the young tender leaves before the plants flowered, washed them well, and piled them raw in a bowl. In a skillet, she heated a little precious bacon grease with a splash of vinegar and a pinch of sugar until it bubbled and spat, then poured that hot dressing straight over the greens. The heat wilted the leaves on contact, the vinegar brightened everything, and the fat turned a handful of weeds into something that tasted almost elegant. The greens carried real vitamins at a time when fresh produce was precious. Foraging was not shameful during the war. It was resourceful, and it was everywhere, from Appalachian hollows to city backyards, wherever a family knew which weeds you could actually eat. Number 11. Victory Garden Vegetable Pie. With meat rationed and vegetables growing free in the backyard, the all-vegetable main dish became a genuine centerpiece. Inspired by wartime recipes crossing the Atlantic, American cooks built a savory pie from whatever the garden gave them. Your grandmother diced carrots, potatoes, turnips, onions, and peas, simmered them until just tender, thickened the liquid into a light gravy, and poured the whole thing into a pastry or under a topping of mashed potato. Baked until golden, it was hearty enough to satisfy a working man who had come to expect meat at supper. By the middle of the war, Victory Gardens were producing a stunning share of all the fresh vegetables eaten in the country, tens of millions of home plots turning lawns, and lots into food. A pie like this was patriotism you could eat. It used no ration points, wasted nothing from the garden, and turned an afternoon of weeding into a supper the whole family could sit down to. Number 10. Kidney stew. This is another dish the ration book practically gave away for free. Like liver, kidneys cost almost no red points, so thrifty families put them to work. Your grandmother soaked the kidneys in salted water to mellow their strong flavor, trimmed them carefully, then browned the pieces and simmered them low and slow with onions. A little flour to thicken, and whatever vegetables were around until the tough meat turned tender, and the gravy went deep and rich. Served over toast, rice, or mashed potatoes, it was a filling, savory supper for pennies. Plenty of people turned up their noses at organ meats, and plenty of children learned to dread the smell. But a cook who knew the soaking trick could turn kidneys into something genuinely good. During the war, wasting a cheap and nutritious cut like this was simply not done. Every part of the animal had a job, and the family that ate the whole beast ate the best for the least. Number 9. Peanut butter bread. Protein was the war's great obsession, and peanut butter was cheap, filling, and not rationed. So it climbed out of the sandwich and into the loaf pan. Your grandmother stirred peanut butter directly into a simple quick bread batter of flour, a little sugar, baking powder, and milk, then baked it into a dense, moist, faintly sweet loaf. Sliced and spread with a scrape of butter or a little jam, it made a filling breakfast or a lunch that stuck to your ribs through a long afternoon. Peanuts grew abundantly in the American South. They were affordable, and they carried the protein that scarce meat could not always provide. Wartime cooks put peanut butter into breads, cookies, soups, and sauces, bringing every bit of nourishment from the humble legume. It was ordinary and it was everywhere, and for a family counting meat points to the penny, a slice of peanut butter bread was quiet, cheap, reliable protein on a plate. Second pattern, break. Here is something the food companies would rather you did not think about. The war did not just change how families cooked, it rewired what they bought forever. Before 1942, most Americans had never touched a can of Spam, never baked with a cracker crust, never trusted a boxed shortcut over their own two hands. Rationing forced them to, and the companies noticed. They flooded newspapers and radio with recipes built around their products. Mock apple pie on the cracker box, casseroles built on canned soup, sandwiches built on canned meat, all framed as patriotic duty. They taught a whole generation to reach for the can and the box. And when the war ended and the rationing stopped, the habit stayed. Convenience food did not conquer the American kitchen by accident. It marched in through the ration book, wearing the flag, and it never left. Your grandmother learned those shortcuts because she had no choice. Her daughters kept them because the advertising made sure they would. Number 8, fried cornmeal mush. When flour ran short and money ran shorter, cornmeal kept families fed the way it had for generations. Your grandmother boiled cornmeal in salted water until it thickened into a heavy porridge, and that alone, topped with a little molasses or a scrape of drippings, was a full supper on a lean night. But the real magic came the next morning. She poured the leftover mush into a loaf pan and let it set firm overnight in the cold. Then she sliced it thick, dredged the slices in a little flour, and fried them in a hot skillet until each side turned deep golden and crisp. Served with syrup or a fried egg, fried mush felt almost like a treat. It was cheap, it was filling, and it used practically no rationed ingredients at all. Cornmeal stretched further than wheat flour and cost less, which is exactly why it anchored so many wartime breakfasts across the rural South and Midwest. Number 7, Boston baked beans. A pot of beans was the quiet backbone of the wartime table, and molasses made them sing. Sugar was rationed, but molasses often was not, so families leaned hard on its dark sweetness. Your grandmother soaked dried navy beans overnight, then baked them low and slow for hours with molasses, a little dry mustard, a chopped onion, and a small piece of salt pork buried in the middle. Over an afternoon, the beans drank in the sweetness and the smoke and turned soft and glossy, and the liquid cooked down into a thick, dark, sticky sauce. A pound of dried beans cost almost nothing and fed the whole family for 2 days. The beans carried real protein without touching the meat ration, which made them priceless when red points ran out. Served with brown bread and a raw onion on the side, a pot of baked beans was cheap, sustaining, and deeply satisfying, the kind of supper that got a family through a hard week. Number 6, Scrapple. This is the dish that makes people flinch, and it was pure wartime thrift made solid. When a family or a butcher had pork scraps that would otherwise go to waste, the trimmings, the odd bits, the pieces too small to sell, nothing was thrown away. Your grandmother simmered those scraps until the meat fell apart, then stirred in cornmeal and a little flour until the whole thing thickened, seasoned it with sage, pepper, and thyme. and poured it into a loaf pan to set firm overnight. The next morning, she sliced it a 1/4 inch thick and fried it until each side turned deep mahogany and crisp. Served with a fried egg and a drizzle of syrup or apple butter, it launched working men out the door and into the factories that ran day and night for the war effort. A loaf cost almost nothing and lasted a week. Waste was unpatriotic during the war, and Scrapple was thrift you could fry. Number 5. Beef tongue. Few cuts show off wartime resourcefulness, like a whole beef tongue, and few cost fewer ration points. It looked intimidating in the butcher's case, which is exactly why it was cheap and why families overlooked it. Your grandmother knew better. She simmered the tongue for hours with onion, bay leaf, and salt until it turned fork tender, then peeled off the tough outer skin to reveal the rich, mild, tender meat underneath. Sliced thin, it made cold sandwiches for a week of packed lunches, or she reheated it in a tangy gravy for a hot supper. A single tongue stretched across many meals and asked almost nothing of the ration book. It sounds strange to modern ears, but during the war it was smart, filling, and genuinely delicious. The family that was willing to cook the odd cuts, the ones their squeamish neighbors passed over, ate more meat for fewer points than anyone else on the block. Third pattern break. Here is what nobody puts on the patriotic posters. Behind every one of these meals was a woman doing an almost impossible job with a smile she did not always feel. She was often running the house alone while her husband was overseas, sometimes working a factory shift herself, and then coming home to feed a family on a booklet of stamps and a garden she planted with her own hands. She saved bacon grease in a can on the stove because used fat was collected for the war effort. She flattened tin cans and saved string and turned yesterday's bread into tomorrow's supper. She made a birthday cake with no eggs and a pie with no fruit, and she made her children believe it was normal, even special. These meals were not just about points and prices. They were about a promise that no matter how tight the war squeezed, there would still be something warm on the table tonight. That quiet daily heroism is the thing history forgets to mention. Number 4. Margarine in the color packet. Butter was rationed hard, so most families turned to margarine, and margarine came with a bizarre little ritual. Because of laws protecting the dairy industry, Margarine was sold white, the pale color of lard, and it looked deeply unappetizing on the table. To fix that, each package came with a small capsule or a packet of orange-yellow dye. Your grandmother handed the block and the dye to the children, and their job was to squeeze, mash, and knead the color through the soft margarine by hand until the whole thing turned an even buttery yellow. It took real effort and a strong wrist, and it usually left a bit of dye on somebody's fingers. Only then did it look like butter and earn a place on the bread. Whole generations remember that kneading as a chore and a small joke of wartime life. It was the strange, humble price of putting something butter-colored on your toast when the real thing was locked behind ration stamps. Number 3. Milk toast. On the leanest nights, when even the stretchers and substitutes ran out, supper came down to bread, milk, and a little warmth. Your grandmother toasted a few slices of day-old bread, laid them in a bowl, and poured over warm milk, sweetened with just a pinch of sugar, and softened with a scrape of butter if any could be spared. The toast drank up the warm milk and turned soft, almost like a porridge, comforting and easy to eat. It cost almost nothing. It used no ration points to speak of, and it filled a child's stomach before bed on a night when there was nothing else. Mothers made it for the sick, for the very young, and for everyone on the evenings when the money and the stamps had simply run out. Nobody wrote milk toast down in a fancy cookbook. It was too plain, too humble, but in 1,000 kitchens, it was the quiet meal that got a family through to morning. Number 2. Rabbit stew. With beef and pork locked behind red points, families turned to the meat that did not need a stamp at all, the meat they could raise or hunt themselves. Rabbits bred fast, ate garden scraps, and never touched the ration book, so backyard hutches sprang up across the country beside the victory gardens. When it was time, your grandmother cut the rabbit into pieces, dredged them in seasoned flour, browned them in a skillet, and then simmered everything low and slow with onions, carrots, potatoes, and a little broth until the meat pulled tender from the bone and the gravy went rich and savory. It tasted mild, a little like chicken, and it made a genuine meat supper on a night the butcher could not. Squirrel, venison, and whatever else a hunter brought home filled the same role. This was self-reliance on the plate. A family that raised its own rabbits ate real meat all through the war, while their neighbors counted stamps. Number 1. Vegetable soup and the soup bone. At the very top of the list is the meal that fed more American families through the war than any single dish, and it started with a bone the butcher practically gave away. A soup bone cost almost nothing because there was little meat left on it, but simmered for hours it gave up everything it had. Your grandmother dropped that bone into a big pot of water, and then, over the days that followed, added whatever the victory garden and the pantry offered. Carrots, onions, potatoes, cabbage, a handful of barley, the ends of vegetables too small to serve any other way, a few beans, a can of tomatoes. Nothing was wasted. The pot simmered low on the back of the stove, growing richer and deeper, and it fed the family for days, a little different at every meal. It cost pennies and used barely any ration points at all. This was the meal that turned scraps into supper and a single bone into a week of warmth. It asked nothing but patience, and it gave back everything. In a war fought as much in the kitchen as anywhere, the humble soup pot was the quiet weapon that kept a family fed, together, and going. Here is my challenge. Make one of these this week. Just one. The mock apple pie, the wacky cake, the salmon patties, the pot of vegetable soup built from a bone and a garden. Then come back and tell me if it was better than you expected, because I made the mock apple pie, and my family could not believe there were no apples in it. Drop the one you are going to try in the comments. I want to know if the wacky cake gets more love than the fried spam. Because these were not just wartime meals. They were proof that a family could be squeezed to the bone and still put something warm and something good on the table tonight.